they would not acknowledge. And that's why I said, there's a difference between having privilege and carving out one space with knives. You
Yeah.
know, like I fought for not only for myself, but I fought for them. And,
Yes.
and I was just like, really? And so at that particular point, I had like struggled over the relationship, but then I was like, okay, cut the
Mm-hmm.
end. You know what I mean? I will not
Yeah.
consider you again. And then it's like
Oh,
really weird to like never even, people never even having the courage to like say, like, at least if I feel like I like really fucked up or I did something, like I will try to like approach you. I will try to say I'm sorry, or I will try
Mm-hmm.
to say, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so it's just weird now. Like, I mean, obviously they are aware that they offended me because then they start liking all my posts on everything and like all
Yeah.
this stuff. But it's like, like woman to woman, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Call me up, say, Pamela, I'm sorry. Or, I
Yeah.
thought about, or how did that land with you? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But like not even to give, each other the language.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are live now. We're gonna play a little bit of music while we wait for folks to start rolling in. And if you have any requests, I was thinking of playing. Well, maybe I'll make it a surprise. Hold up. I'm in the mood for this right now. A little bit of Tracy Chapman.
Hey.
Much for being here today. We are so excited to welcome Pamela Sneed and Sydney Lawson in discussing Lambda Award winning poetic memoir, Funeral Diva. Round of applause and snaps. Thank you so much. Let me tell you a little bit about who we've got on the stream tonight in case you're new here or you don't know who we are and what we're about. We are Lost City Books. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore located in Adams Morgan, D.C., owned by Adam Waterous, no relation to Adams Morgan, who is a veteran dog lover, longtime resident of D.C., and enthusiastic disseminator of books. We have our close knit team of really cool kids, and mostly adults, actually. We're all adults, but I like to think of us as cool kids anyway. We're artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course, avid readers all coming together to create this unique environment and to curate an eclectic selection of books. I am your host for tonight, Shady Rose. You'll see my face in just a sec. Pamela Sneed is a New York-based poet, performer, visual artist, and educator. She is the author of Funeral Diva from City Lights 2020, Sweet Dreams, Belladonna 2018, and Kong, Vintage Entity Press 2009. Imagine more Imagine being more afraid of freedom than slavery, Holt 1998, and others. Sneed has performed at the Whitney Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Poetry Project, the High Line, the New Museum, and the Toronto Biennale. She appears in Nikki Giovanni's The 100 Best African American Poems and has been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes. And as of recently, has also just won the Lambda Award for Lesbian Poetry for Funeral Diva, the book we're here to discuss tonight. So, snaps again. It's going to be snaps all throughout, Pamela.
Yeah.
Sydney Lawson is a writer, actor, and history buff native to the DMV with a love of food, theater, art, and all things hidden. After discovering her love of history, she embarked on a journey of discovery, equity, and empowerment through food, writing, empathy, and service to others. Sydney has performed in numerous roles in plays and productions on DC stages and imbues all her work with a core of advocacy for social justice. And also is a friend of mine. Funeral Diva. In this collection of personal essays and poetry, acclaimed poet and performer Pamela Sneed details her coming of age in New York City during the late 1980s. Funeral Diva captures the impact of AIDS on Black queer life and highlights the enduring bonds between the living, the dying, and the dead. Sneed's poems not only converse with lovers past and present, but also with her literary forebears like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, whose aesthetic and thematic investments she renews for a contemporary American landscape. Offering critical focus on matters from police brutality to LGBTQ plus rights, Funeral Diva confronts today's most pressing issues with acerbic wit and audacity. The collection closes with Sneed's reflections on the two pandemics of her time, AIDS and COVID-19, which we are still going through, and the disproportionate impact of each on African American communities. And as I said, Funeral Diva is a Lammy Award winner for lesbian poetry. We've got a little um, poster there for that. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests for today, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Hi,
Hello.
hi, everyone. I can't see participants. I only see us. Do we have participants?
So I see the participants on our YouTube stream, but we're not going to see them in this stream.
Oh, okay.
So I'd love to open up with just sort of a broader discussion of what is Funeral Diva. When you put this together, um, having read it, it had a huge impact on me and had so many relatable experiences and moments, despite being largely set in a different era than the one that I've grown up in and the one that I've experienced as I came of age. So I'd like to hear more of what Funeral Diva is to you and what are the central pillars of this work for you.
Ooh, that's a big question. But I'm up for the challenge. So I have to say that so the other night when I won the Lambda, and it's hard for me to sort of like take in my achievements. I'm working on it. But I mean I've worked, this collection is a culmination of 20 years of work. I started some of like history and I started Funeral Diva like 20 years ago. And I mean, of course, they've been updated and they've changed or whatever, but it's been a long journey. And a lot of the material was written in the last year or two. Um, but one of the I started writing Funeral Diva like right after, like, I guess the Twin Towers, right after 9/11. And I was going through a really tough time and I was like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I really didn't know outcome. And I sat down to write, and then the stories came out whole, and that was like the information that I needed to know that I was going to make it, that I was going to be okay. So that the writing told me that that I was a survivor, so that's pretty amazing. But um but when I won the other night, I was thinking and I said to myself, I said, well, this is a triumph for me and for my friends, my friends of that era, and that means the most to me because I feel like, as I describe in the book, a lot of people were felled by, cancer. A lot of people were felled by AIDS. I had a lot of friends. I lost a lot of peers. And I really feel like that time was really undocumented. Like, people are starting to do stuff about the AIDS era now, but we're sort of like sprinkled into, white narratives. And then, but nothing comprehensive, certainly from a woman of color, lesbian perspective, right? Um, and like one famous like writer said something about like, oh, she's right, her history becomes our history. And it's interesting that it's like, oh, okay, they own the history, but so that so that I guess, yeah, I am writing a history or her story. And that mentions and that encompasses like all the people who are influential and important to me. And certainly I feel like, gay and lesbian history, has been told from the perspective mainly of like white people, white lesbians and gays, and if told at all, and so to become the narrator, and then also like, now I'm participating in all these talks on the AIDS era and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, and that like women of color are not, I'm the only woman of color. And I'm like, oh, thank God, at least they found me, you know what I mean? but like, AIDS now worldwide is disproportionately affecting like women of color, right? And they're like, but in all these shows, they're told from the perspectives of white men, so still we're not like really included, and then for like, I don't think black lesbians at all have had a voice in like the larger culture about, documenting our history. Do you know what I mean? um so it was very, so that's been really important, to step forward and to like offer an account that has not, necessarily been offered. And again, like, and then people feel like AIDS only impacted men, and it's like, well, no, that's not true. I mean, again, worldwide it's, women of color, but it's, again, it's like, yeah, as I say in the book, as if, AIDS hadn't happened to us, our brothers, our friends, our lovers, our cousins, the black gay boys in the choir became our disappeared. So it's like, of course, and we were caretakers and everything. So to tell these, stories separated by gender and separated by race is a complete, fallacy. So I think that's the first priority that I had, in wanting to tell the story. And I've carried that story before anybody, was writing about the AIDS era and stuff like that. And certainly not from the perspective of a black lesbian. And like now, and I've told people, I've told publishers, like, listen, this is what we need to talk about. And people are like, what, um, so, and then I think like the rest of it is social justice. I mean, again, I'm talking about origins. A lot of it is like my origin, like being adopted, growing up in the suburbs of Boston, the things that shaped me, the people that shaped me, the artists, coming to the new school and getting involved in activism and poetry and all of that, and then becoming myself. So I think it's a story about origins. I think it's a story about family, and then sort of chosen family. It's a story about like loss, but also I think it's triumphant. It's also about being a survivor. um yeah, and charting my own course, and then I'm really happy that the book is mixed form. So really it was two manuscripts that came together. And I think, Amy Shoulder, who was my editor, she basically put the manuscripts together, and I was like, oh, thank God we could have poetry and prose, because that's the way that I think and that's the way that I write. Um, and for a long time the literary world would not accept that, and now it's called hybrid literature. I was like, okay, thank God, but we've been speaking in, this language for a long time. So finally it's getting some acceptance. But I had like, I had a black woman tell me that I was confused in my forms, that I didn't know what I was doing with form, and it was like, and then somebody called me like, experimental, and I mean, maybe I am more experimental, but I don't know, but I mean, I'm not Kathy Acker, you know what I mean? it's just it's just, I feel like my form reflects the way that we speak, which is prosaic, which is poetic, and doesn't make those kind of separations, Um, yeah. So I said a lot.
No, yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely agree, and I think that if we expect form to conform into very narrow categories, then we're not going to experience the full breadth of what feeling and experience is being communicated. And I do think Funeral Diva achieves that, where sometimes the feeling is more abstract and more rooted in sense, and sometimes like sensory experiences, or sometimes that experience is so full of words that it must be prose. Um, and I'd love to hear a bit. I know, Sydney, it looks like you had something to say. Sorry. Yeah. I know that part of what being seen and being heard, especially as a queer Black person, a queer Black woman, has to do with is breaking form, breaking prescribed forms, and then inventing new ways of communicating more precisely. So I'm curious about. I feel like Funeral Diva does a bit of inventing in a way, but you're also saying it sounds like you're also saying that this is how we were already communicating. Um,
Right. I mean, going back to like, okay, if they talk about Shakespeare all the time and like, but Shakespeare was interdisciplinary, Shakespeare wrote poetry, Shakespeare, did plays, Shakespeare wrote prose. So in that regard, and Toni Morrison had a playhouse, you know what I mean? She wrote plays. So the bottom line is, and if you read some of her work, it reads like a monologue, you know what I mean? Or it reads like, satire, right? What was it? They carved "Give Me a Break" on the mouth of the oven in paradise. I mean, it's hysterical, Or somebody like running away in like children's baby boots, yellow baby boots. And I'm quoting, Toni Morrison's Paradise. I mean, this is like, satire, right? And so in that regard, I mean, I think we've always worked in mixed forms and to not allow us like sort of like that tongue in a way is colonizing us, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, and there is like sort of like there is certainly invention, um and somebody said like poets like invent the language that they want to speak in, so some of it's new, some of it's inventive, and some of it's ancient, you know and so really it's like it's a restoration, it's a return to what is naturally ours.
I definitely agree with that. I'll take one moment to remind our viewers, if you're watching right now and you would like to ask a question for the Q&A at the end of this live stream, you can go ahead and leave it as a comment below, and we'll get around to your questions towards the end of the stream. So hold tight. Something else that I wanted to discuss about Funeral Diva, as we're moving into, I wanted to talk about the personal history of yours that exists in here, and sort of how you formulated and chose these moments to focus on and to deconstruct and to break into with these poems and essays. If that question
well,
makes sense.
well I don't know, I mean, like, really, I was talking to a student today and we're talking about like psychic stuff and we're talking about like intuition. And so, I mean, I really find myself to be like, I'm a deep listener, And so, I follow my instincts a lot, like more and more. I remember like years ago, I was like with an acting troupe and it was all about like following the impulse, following the instinct, right? And more and more as an artist, like listening to the impulse or listening to what the intuition tells you. So it's more like I'm not necessarily consciously choosing some of the stuff. It's more like it comes up and then it's like, oh, okay, document it. um I'm working on a book. I just started working on something that I didn't know I was going to write, but I think it's going to be like all family stories. And I want it to be visual as well. So I'll have some of my visual work and some of the portraiture I've done of my dad. Um, and why am I saying that? Um, Oh, and so, basically, yeah, it just came up. And it wasn't anything that I had planned to write. I have some other ideas about what I want my next books to be. But then it was like, oh, okay, this is coming up, So, but then also in the process of doing that, I've also been kind of giving myself this permission, like if something, really bothers me or I find myself saying it over and over again, I'm like, write it down, make it a story, make it a story. And I mean, I know that like as an overview, I've always done that, but more and more, I'm like, put it down, put it like, like write it, shape it into a story. So like really I think in this particular book, the focus will be like kind of like freeing myself from some demons. You know what I mean? Because I'm really like, put it down, you know, I want that in there, you know. So whereas before I might have like, you know, censored and selected and, you know, whatever, now I'm just sort of like, if you're thinking it and you've thought it many, I want you to shape it into a story, you know.
Absolutely. That actually kind of reminds me, Sydney, of your writing process as well. And I'd be interested to hear if you, as you were reading Funeral Diva and kind of reflecting your own poetic writing process off of that, if you saw some things that kind of jumped out at you in that way too.
In terms of the process or in terms of pieces that just moved me?
Both, any.
Okay. Um, I will definitely say that the pieces involving your personal journey with your family were the ones that probably made me break down in tears the most, probably because of the way they were presented. The way the entire book seems to be structured is very much an experience as if you're sort of sitting on the shore of an ocean and the waves are constantly coming. And so you sort of get used to this rhythm that is established in your writing. And it's sort of it just becomes a new rhythm of life because you acclimate yourself to the environment of the book. And then eventually one bigger wave comes and just knocks you over and you're broken down for a second and then you pop back up and then the waves continue. And each of those waves is a wave of pain, a wave of feeling, a wave of emotion. And I think for me, my writing process is very much me sort of turning inward to that constant wave of grief and emotion that I think all human beings sort of live with. We all feel that constant wave of emotion and pain just in our daily lives. And I think that for me, and for most writers, probably like our ability to look inward and access that is what makes what sort of gives us the ability to put that into paper, sort of to make it more palatable or accessible to other people. um I really related strongly to your piece Untitled. Something about just the way it was structured. Well, I have a lot to say about it. I will wait to say it at another point in this. I won't take up all the time for that, but I will definitely say that I related very much to that piece, and I will say that that piece broke me down. A lot of your pieces broke me down, but that piece broke me down really, really bad, like intensely. And I related a lot to the rhythm of how it was written and how I feel it felt like a very familiar rhythm that I use to access my own feelings when I need to turn myself inside out in order to process my emotions and put them onto the page. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but it's I'm just sort of, yeah, that's sort of it's very palpable. It's very accessible. I loved it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful to, you know, hear both of you speak, you know, because I don't have the outside perspective, you know, so much, you know, so it's like, but then to kind of be with like my own kind and like hear how it resonates or something, that's like really special.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, thank you for offering this book into the world for us to have
Yeah,
feelings about. Um,
seriously.
I think I would like, if you are comfortable with, I would like to hear a bit of an excerpt from Funeral Diva, and I know that our viewers are probably interested in that as well. If
Okay.
you'd like to live read.
Okay.
And
Long home, but I'm gonna go. Born free. I used to always write about Osato Saint, slamming his hand down on the pulpit at Donald Wood's funeral, when it was common to hide the cause of death of young men who died from AIDS, if they were buried at all and weren't abandoned. Someone told me about a thin boy, thin with fear and death, played piano for the choir. No one touched him or talked about it. I know in my mother's family, her mother's sister said parasite had killed her son when he died suddenly. But I remember once him coming out of a gay bar in Boston and all the white boys said, "How do you know her?" And I don't know if it was him or I who said his cousin. I'm his cousin. He made me promise not to tell anyone in the family I'd seen him there. So when they said parasite, I knew something didn't ring true. His mother, a seemingly healthy woman, died shortly after that. But I always felt their deaths were related. His mother, either from lies or repression or a broken heart, having lost her young son. And I know everyone blames Jussie Smollett for his lies and staged attack, but it makes me think that there was something very toxic going on, that he didn't feel that he could talk to someone, either that or he was covering up an addiction or a hookup. Watching Asado stand up at Donald's funeral and tell the truth goes down in history as one of the bravest moments I'd ever witnessed. Either that or Audre Lorde spreading open the arms of her dashiki, the bravest woman we'd all witnessed, telling a crowded room of followers, "I began on this journey as a coward." That, or seeing a friend at the height of the AIDS era at a bar, his face covered in purple welts, refusing to hide, going out in public. That, or Donald Woods being feeble, barely able to walk, accepting an award as a director of AIDS films, or an ex-lover on a beach taking off her top and refusing to hide her mastectomy scar. Or when Denitra Vance performed at the public theater and danced naked, revealing her mastectomy scars, and Audrey refusing to wear prosthesis, or when Zakes Mokai and Master Harold and the Boys, in their first Broadway play that a cousin took me to, said to his white master, "Have you ever seen a black man's ass?" and pulled down his pants and revealed himself to the audience. I was 16 years old. Or seeing my mother beaten religiously and still go out to work as if it hadn't happened at all, or even me surviving so many incredible tests. Once when I was talking to a doctor, I doubted my strength. He looked at me incredulously and said, "You are strong." Another doctor looked at me, my suffering, and asked, "Isn't anyone there for you?" And another one said, "You deserve to be taken care of." But today, once more, I am nursing my broken heart, caused by someone who betrayed, was not honest. That and attending an event and asking white people to give up their seats to Black people who couldn't sit down, and seeing social justice in action. Yes, I often think of Asado for the important place he resides in my history, but today I'm examining his tactics, pulling the tools off the shelf, dusting off the weaponry in an exhibit, because today I need to use what he taught me. Today, I feel that puff of rage, that continuous assault, and I want to stand up and testify, though I, too, haven't been asked. I want to interrupt all the proceedings, all the places Black lesbians have been erased and silenced, like looking down at a manuscript, seeing that they asked a young white woman to write about Black queer history when it's been my area of expertise forever. Or only attributing 80s and 90s AIDS activism to ACT UP. I want the point of outrage now not only to be the historicizing of AIDS, but the fact that women and Black lesbians have been erased from the dialogue. When there are so many organizations like GMAD, other countries, ADOTI, Men of All Colors Together, South to Soul, African Americans, Lesbians United in Social Change, Las Buenas Amigas, and more, or asking where are all the Black lesbians on Pose, because certainly they were there on the piers and part of that history, and why are white men constantly at the helm to tell our stories, and why don't white queers recognize this? That, and seeing panel after panel being organized on history and art and all things important to the world, and no one thinking or noticing it might be important to have a Black lesbian present, just like they kicked Stormé out of the Stonewall narrative. And what about the people who weren't on the streets, but in jobs, fighting the systems, the dykes and the queers, meeting each other and forming community and connections and families and love? Just like in South Africa when they prevented intermingling, but ways were found. And each time we touched or loved and found each other in darkness and in light, it was resistance. Each time we told each other, "You're beautiful, you are not wrong. It was resistance when we stood up to the parents and the families and the courts and those that shunned us. It was resistance when we wore what we really wanted to wear. It was resistance when we yelled at the doctors and the drug professionals. It was resistance. And every time we wrote and read poems, it was resistance. And every time some queer kid stays alive because they saw us, they read us, discovered the archive, we've won. Every war is fought on our bodies. And one day, after the gender, racial, sexual orientation wars are over in America, there will be a new generation, just like in South Africa, called the Born Frees.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That, that piece completely exemplifies what Sydney was saying earlier about the waves and the waves and the waves, um, kind of crashing in of feeling. And I think that this piece in particular, especially with that last line that you came out with, gives us this clear picture of how the Black woman is the warrior and mother and sister and caretaker and judge and jury, of the revolution and of the future that we're building. At least that is one of the takeaways that I have. I'd be curious, Sydney, to hear some of your takeaways from that piece as well.
Um, Absolutely I agree with everything you said, Shady. I also would like to add, I was very, I was, I'm always moved by the line, the wars fought on our bodies, because it's not like it's fought just with our bodies. Like our bodies are the battlefield. We're dehumanized, depersonalized. Um, yeah, it's very an emotional line actually. Um, and it just, you feel it on so many layers in so many different ways. Um, um, yes, but that was what I had to.
And I think any people who are viewing right now or who read this piece are gonna who all are also Black and women and queer or femmes and queer, are gonna see their own life experience reflected in that piece. The screaming at the doctors, the all these incredible acts of courage that are taken for granted in a lot of ways, only to even have our voices silenced within the community as well as outside of the community. Um, so I think, yeah, thank you so much for that, Pamela.
Thanks.
Um, Speaking of the community, the queer community, the LGBTQ community, by the way, for anyone who's watching and doesn't know what we mean when we say the community, um, at large, I'd love to hear and to discuss a little bit about what being a Black lesbian who was present during the AIDS crisis, present during the some of the incredibly formative civil rights movements for the LGBTQ community, how that experience reflects in your experience of the present day. You in the blurb about the book, it was mentioned that not only is the uh, AIDS crisis discussed, but also the current coronavirus pandemic that we're going through, and just feeling the mirrors of that experience and how underserved, for example, uh, black the Black gay community, the Black LGBT community is during this time. And I wonder if you have insights into more of those sort of mirrored experiences too, and how they feel.
Well, one of the things that I also, that's important to me in Funeral Diva is talking about like women's health. and which comes out in A Tale of Two Pandemics, when I'm talking about like the doctor at Mount Sinai, star of his field, was accused of drugging and raping, black women, no, women, and then like nobody like believed it until it was proven. And I said his victims were only black women, the rest he left alone, right? And so like literally he was like targeting black women, but also I just feel like and I say in that that it's time for a medical Me Too, and that system is so fucking like just broken, and it's broken for women, it's broken for queers, but I feel like there's just so much silence. Like everybody's like, invested, like, women's wombs, as I say, are big business, so like everyone's invested, on some level, but then they don't really care about women's bodies, right? And so I really want to see like a system that addresses women's health, adequately. I mean, it's just full of gaslighting and like, sterilization and like all kinds of like brutality that never has been comprehensively addressed or even spoken about, and so that's one of my priorities. And like, coming through, like one thing that's really important to me is that like I never forgot, like some people, I guess they grow up and they're like, oh yeah, well that happened. But that was like losing all my friends to like HIV AIDS and all my mentors to cancer, like that was pretty impactful, you know what I mean? And that shaped me. And so it's always been like, I say that I learned, more in that era from little boys, with baby faces, with death sentences, and little girls, like it's just like those were my teachers, you know what I mean? And so like I feel like it's filled me with like a sense of fury, but I'm very much like all my art, like everything is impacted by that time. Like when I did this performance piece Kong, like I wanted it to look like how it felt like in the 80s when performance art was really, taking hold like downtown in New York. And like you left the theater and you were shaking, you know what I mean? Like every light was on. Like I saw, Denitra Vance, like, unveil her mastectomy scars before she died. I was like, it was like the most shocking thing I'd ever seen, and like that was the quality. I saw, Anna Devere Smith's, Fires in the Mirror, you know what I mean? Like, so all of those things like really, really, really informed me, and I carry that sense of like I want when you hear me or when you see me to feel impacted. You know what I mean? Like I just did something for a performance space, and I mean it was really interesting because like there are all these videos and whatever, and like I think it was me and maybe somebody else, maybe one or two other people who talks about anything that was going on in the world. You know, I was like, are you kidding me? You have all these artists and no one is like addressing, so for me, like there's no separation, like the personal and the political and all those things, it all is intertwined, and like that era like really shaped me. I mean, I grew up, pretty much in a period of activism, and it's always continued.
Yeah, something you said too makes me think about how the role of art in activism has kind of transformed a little bit, or maybe might still maintain some similarities to 30, 20, 20, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Um, and I think it's really important to think about and to discuss the role that capitalism has come to have in art, and how there's an arts movement kind of spread across, especially queer communities and black and brown communities and indigenous communities, that is intentionally decolonizing the arts process and decolonizing, we talked about this a little bit earlier, decolonizing the role of art in revolution and in community protection and care and all of those things. And at the same time, if you ask me, I would say that we have also slipped into allowing art to be so commodified in so many ways that it's really difficult to connect to the messages and to the meaning and to the people who make that art, and the reasons that the art is made. Because you mentioned a little bit about a a sort of disconnected critique that you received about your experience as an artist. I think we talked about this a little bit before we started live streaming. Um, that said, I would love to hear your both of your opinions on this, on how do we continue the work of decolonizing the arts space and the movements that art represents, in the era of hyper commodified, hyper capitalist arts spaces.
Well, I kind of wanted to go off topic a little bit, but it's related, because like I mean, we're using like the word community like really broadly, right? Because in a way, like I belong to a community, like you know, like meeting the two of you here and like talking is like really moving to me. And but then like I was confronted with something like the other night when I won the Lambda, like there's like a whole group of like black lesbians, I guess, who don't speak to me, because and not that I don't hang out with them and like, whatever, you know what I mean? But like they don't speak to me or they're mad at me. Like no one said anything to my face, of course, but they're angry at like the things that I write about because I've talked about violence in black lesbian communities and stuff like that. And they don't want to admit that those things go on or whatever. And I'm just sort of like, you've watched me like, fight from the time I was like, we big, you see me, represent like, and you can't congratulate me. I just like, and I mean, I don't hang out with these people, I just like do my own thing and, I don't talk about them or whatever. So, maybe, I don't know, maybe they still have some kind of investment in me if they're not talking to me. But I was just like so hurt by that. I was just like, are you kidding me? You know, that you couldn't look at my face and say congratulations, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and it
Mhm.
sounds like their issue is so much about, oh, I want to create an optic, package of what being a black lesbian looks like, and we can't admit to the ultimately human fact that the community does experience violence and does commit violence against each other because we are human beings and human beings do that, right?
Right. Well,
Uh,
rather than an apology or rather than, how can we make it right? You know what I mean? And so in
yeah.
that regard, you know, I represent a community and I don't, you know what I mean? Like I'm an independent. I mean, on one hand, it's like it's beautiful to be a part of one, and then sometimes you outgrow it, and you got to just do what you have to do. And I mean, it's petty. And like a lot of times, it's not even that. It's just like kind of like haterade. You know what I mean? One person's like competing with the other because there can only be one. You know what I mean? But all kinds of projections and stuff like that. So it's just, I'm always so ambivalent about community. Like sometimes I experience it, but then on a certain level, I guess I'm not part of a black lesbian community. I don't know.
No, that's definitely a really relatable comment. I think, and it is. I think it is actually related to what we were talking about before then too, because it's so much about um, what exactly makes you qualified for the community, what makes you qualified to quote represent the community, and also often that means you have to have this very assimilated, very cookie cutter kind of answer to everybody and let other people construct your identity for you kind of space. And
Mhm.
Yeah, and then just like not to say it, like, none of these people who are like not talking to me, like, no one has ever said anything to my face. You know what I mean? So it's like, I mean, I just feel like, okay, this is like a petty grievance, but I'm gonna put it out here because it bothers me. But I'm just sort of like, if there's really something that you have a beef with, at least like give me an opportunity to speak to it. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like to not even that. It's just so cowardly, you know what I mean? And then I think about, you know, we're fighting the world for this, recognition and acceptance or whatever. And it's just like we have to like start at home. You know what I mean? We have to treat each other, we have to treat ourselves with respect. We're talking about love all the time. Well, the first person we have to love is ourselves, right? And that's a big job. And then, and it extends outward. One of the things that I have a problem with, like the Black Lives Matter thing, it's just kind of like, people say it. Like I have a lot of like white friends who love to say it. And like, but they'll talk over me in a conversation, like disrespect my like lived experience, you know what I mean? Position themselves as an authority, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess somebody's Black Life Matters, but it's not mine, right? So I'm just like tired of the hypocrisy, like this chasm between the statements and the actions, you know?
absolutely. Oh, so go ahead, Sydney. I know you.
Oh, I was just going to add, I completely agree with all of that. And sometimes it can be so ironic because we join communities because they're supposed to be based on forming a safe space. We're all supposed to be in this collective identity together. We're all supposed to be individuals with under this umbrella of this identity of our shared experiences. And then as artists, we want to reflect our shared experience back at our community, back to the another community at large, like humanity. And then our own community decides to police us because it doesn't fit what you mentioned earlier, shady optics. And that can be so disheartening, and it can often marginalize you within your own community, and you just feel so discouraged and alone, and it's an awful feeling.
And the,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't hung out with them for a long time. And like, sadly enough, like, I mean, most of my closest friends are like white men, you know? It's like, I don't know, figure that one out, you know what I'm saying? But, I have more safety sometimes with them, not all the time, but sometimes, than I do with people that are supposed to be like me, So, I don't know. Like, so sometimes, like in this environment, like I feel like a camaraderie and I feel a connection with how we're talking, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, and then I feel that sense of community and that pride. And then I'm like off the Zoom and I'm all alone, or I guess community becomes very complicated. If we talk about like Sadia Hartman and Lose Your Mother, and like, I think at the end, she says something about, community are the people who come together, for the purpose of freedom. You know what I mean? And it's not relegated to, color and class and all that stuff. And, I mean, I have issues with that at times, but then sometimes it's really real, you know?
I think about that a lot too, is what actually constitutes an effective and safe community, right? And for me, it's at the same time as being, no matter what your personal identity is, we're united in, like you said, Pamela, in the common cause of for liberation and for freedom, um, and for justice, right? But so often it happens that the intersectionality of all of the things that need to come together for real freedom, for real justice to occur, become ignored, by certain people for whatever reason in the community, and also by being caught up in petty human squabbles that completely derail the purpose of the community, if you ask me. And I mean, for example, to go back and use Black Lives Matter again as an example, uh, it is an incredible movement that reaches across, for example, genders and sexualities, but is distinctly led by queer Black women, distinctly. Um, but the more proliferated the concept becomes, and the more inclusive and less rigorous the community becomes, now we have, corporate Black Lives Matter merch, coming out, and um, people gentrifying neighborhoods and then putting their Black Lives Matter sign in the front yard, right? You know, so it's like, what are we really talking about when we talk about a strong community? And so much of that to me is still to be figured out. But I'd love to hear, Sydney, if you have some thoughts too on what does that mean and how do we do it?
What does it mean to build a community and have it be equitable? I don't, I don't, I have no idea. I feel myself always trying to find community in whatever space I'm in. If I'm always trying to make myself feel authentic and comfortable, even here in this small space. Pamela, earlier you mentioned like this in its way, it's its own community, because we're interacting with one another and we're discussing our feelings, we're discussing our work. Um, Slightly off topic, I do work in sort of food justice, and I work out of a small school. And it's really interesting because the area that I work in is being gentrified, and most of the individuals and whose children go to attend that school. It is a high need school, also, by the way, but it is being gentrified. And a lot of the parents that go there, they're very intensely passionate about Black Lives Matter. They're intensely passionate about equity. But they also have absolutely no interaction with the community there. They are their own community. And I'm trying to every day I'm working as this bridge to try to get these two communities to work together. And they keep saying, yes, we really want equity. Yes. And they have their Black Lives Matter flags and they do all their marches and they're so excited. And they still refuse to speak to the individuals that come to the public spaces that I work with. That both parties are supposed to come together, like this garden or this playground. And it becomes a strong point of contention, and it's very awkward. And I'm not really, it really blows my mind how it is difficult for a lot of people to understand that equity is more than just an idea you have in your head. It is a verb. It's something you have to perform equity. You have to work at equity. It's hard work. A lot of people stop when it comes to community at just where they feel okay, and they don't go past that. They don't push past their comfort zone. And I empathize with that. But I also know that that doesn't lead to growth. So I know as an individual, I work really hard to try to push myself past the comfort zone so that I can grow as a person, so that I can bring more people into a community that I know will always be evolving within my own consciousness. But it's not something that I necessarily expect of others. I just know that it's something I try to work towards because it's difficult. I don't know on a broad scale.
Yeah, it reminds me that I was approached by a Black lesbian organization recently, and they asked me to like serve on the board as an advisor. And like my principal said yes, right away. And then I like hesitated, and I was like, oh God, am I going to be used? Are these the people who are going to betray me? You know what I mean? Like, if you do it, just do it for yourself. Don't do it, because so I became afraid, instead of it being in terms of what I believe in, hell yeah, you know what I mean? But then it's just like my experiences have been so difficult. I'm just like, I don't know. I might need to keep going. Will I be hurt for helping?
That is the question, though, isn't it? Will I be hurt for helping? Because, some people, some of these organizations or people or communities, whatever they want to call them, are not ready for the help they're asking for, ostensibly, right? They say we center these voices, and then, as you mentioned earlier, oh, we're going to talk over you anyway, you know, and it just becomes, you know, a question of am I being used for visibility, or are we actually creating something together? What's the answer? What's the truth? We have a few more minutes, and I want to convey a few questions from our audience really quick, if you all don't mind holding for 1 second here. If you wanted to fill in some comments while I pull up these questions, that'd be great.
Can I just say, you're saying, will I be hurt for helping? In my opinion, encompasses the queer Black femmes experience. Like, just in a nutshell, will I be hurt for helping? I'm going to take that away. I'm going to bury that somewhere. I don't know where I'm going to put that, but that's going to stay with me for a really long time. I'm going to, ooh, ugh.
Yeah, I might write a poem about it. It's the first time I've said it, but I guess,
Please do.
kind of like just be present and real. I don't want to be down on like Black lesbians in the sense that, my heart space is yes, and then I become afraid, or, like meeting with you all, I feel like affirmed, and I feel safe, and I feel good, and I feel like we're on the same page, and so when we are good, and when we are like, I don't know, aligned, it's the most beautiful thing on earth, and then when we're not, ouch.
I have a question from Marjorie here, which is, when you're thinking about the comparisons between COVID-19 and the AIDS crisis, what are some mistakes that are being made again that should not be made again?
I think the biggest thing for me, like, I think is not to make easy comparisons. Like, yeah, there's some similarities. We have things to learn. Like, I mean, I wrote A Tale of Two Pandemics, like after I saw in the Times, they were like, oh, this is a broken system. And it's like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? Where have you been? You know what I'm saying? I mean, even like, previous to like the AIDS era, like, like what was it? Chris Rock was like making a joke that like somebody in his family had to go to a veterinarian to have their teeth pulled. You know what I mean? Like, what has the system done to Black people? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, uh, stop being naive about the healthcare system, and then what each, situation proves to us again and again is that it needs to be redone. It's completely broken, dysfunctional, it doesn't work, right? So that, but like, I feel like stigma, the way that gays and lesbians were treated during the AIDS era, I don't think that there's anything comparable to that. Because like with like, people have been more responsive to COVID because of the fact that, it's attacked the population at large, you know what I mean? And, gay, straight, non-binary, whatever, it's, everybody, right? And so therefore we've had a little bit more action, but even still, it's like, like Trump, I mean, it would have never gotten to the place that it's gotten in the United States, had the Trump administration, acted earlier and not in denial, right? And then we still have like a big crisis because of like what's happening in India, and like parts of the globe. And I really feel like there needs to be, some global strategies and global solutions, not like, oh, we vaccinated our people, we got ours. Good luck. You know what I mean? It doesn't like really work like that, right? So, so the idea of maybe of a global strategy. I mean, some of the AIDS activists are, they were saying that there should be like a COVID movement for accessibility and stuff like that. So in the same way that like people lobbied for drugs for, HIV, AIDS. But I see comparisons in terms of, just living through the stress of living through an epidemic. But I don't want to make like, too many like easy kind of like, drawing the lines, because I feel like it's all very complicated. But, Dr. Fauci or whatever, he worked, he was very diligent during ACT UP, and he's been very active, in the COVID thing. So, he has a long history of working, through pandemics.
Definitely, yeah. I think what you said about not trying to cross the lines or to draw too many comparisons is apt because they're just two different things. It's apples and oranges. Every new experience of the system failing is it's its own thing, um, and the system is either broken or working exactly as it's supposed to, but not for us, which is the other question, right? We have time for maybe one more question. I don't want to keep you all night, but I want to get one more question in here. This one is a bit more lighthearted about the the experience of romance over the years and love and relationships and how moving through sort of the coming of age um, maybe transformed or changed your perspective on love and romance or how that has changed over the years.
No, I mean, I'm like, my romantic stuff is like just tragic. Like, I just, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's like, I've chosen, like, really, I guess because of my family background, that I've gravitated towards like just anything dysfunctional and anything that would hurt me. And so, talking about like capitalism, like how capitalism has impacted love, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of like, it's like consumer shopping, you know what I mean? Shopping on the websites. Um, so, I mean, that is a place in my life that really, I think, just needs transformation. I mean, maybe like now, I'm not as ready or not as willing to just like jump into some crazy dysfunctional thing. Like, so I'm holding myself in a much more precious space. Yeah, hallelujah. It took a long time, it's taken a long time. But, I've had to stay alone too. And I was actually like talking to a student today, and they were disappointed by someone who was kind of like putting them down or competing with them, that was a friend. And, I said, I had to like, in order to kind of like get successful in the way that things are happening now, I had to let go of so many things. I had to let go of so many relationships, because literally there was like a lot of weight. I mean, some people, maybe they attract more healthy things. But I didn't for a long time. And so I had to really let go of a lot. So now, just now, I am open to healthier things. I'll put that out.
I love it. I can relate. I've had a couple of relationship disasters lately that are that spoke to me. Is all I'm going to say about that. We have time for one more question from Titanium 50. Do you think that the differences in our cultures are so vast and so contentious that they won't be able to work, or do you think that there is hope in communities coming together? I think that's a good question to end on.
Yeah, well, I mean, Audre Lorde, if we're going to look to her, I mean, just talked about building community through our differences, right? And that is the hope. You know what I mean? Like the issue, becomes when we're like trying to build these homogenous kind of like communities, and we're not acknowledging, all the differences that exist between us, right? So in that regard, organizing, like respecting each other's differences and coming together, like there's more hope in that than, trying to build something homogenous.
I love it. I totally agree. That's that's what the rainbow's all about, right? All the
What? Yes, yes.
On that note, I will say happy Pride to our viewers and thank you both for being here tonight. Um, really quick, Pamela, if you want to talk a little bit about you said you're working on a new project, if you wanted to slip in a little a word edgewise there.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I have a lot of books that I want to follow up with. I'm thinking about doing a book of epics, but half are already written. And so I think it's going to be called America Is Ready. It started as America Ain't Ready, but it is now. And then I'm like working on this personal project this summer, my family and like combining visual art with it. And I was asking a friend of mine, I was like, do you think somebody will publish it? They're like, yeah, of course, So I was like, okay, because it's also images as well. So we'll see, but hopefully maybe I've opened up enough space and there's enough momentum that I'll be able to do more of what I want.
Absolutely awesome. And for those of you watching, if you want to pick up your copy of Funeral Diva, you can find it at Lost City Books. We're located on 18th Street in Adams Morgan, but you can also hop right onto our website and you can buy the book through us there. We've got a couple copies left, but they're flying off the shelf. So go make sure to grab them.
Fly.
Again, thank you both so much for being here tonight. This was such a great conversation. I felt so seen and heard by both of you, and that's so rare these days. So thank you so much, and you both have a wonderful evening.
Likewise, you all rock. I'm so happy to meet both of you.
Same,
all right,
likewise.
let's stay in touch. All right. Okay.